hppodcraft.com.
In the morning, mist comes up from the sea by the cliffs beyond Kingsport. White and feathery it comes from the deep to its brothers, the clouds, full of dreams of dank pastures and caves of Leviathan. And later, in still summer rains on the steep roofs of poets, the clouds scatter bits of those dreams, that men shall not live without rumor of old strange secrets and wonders that planets tell planets alone in the night. When tales fly thick in the grottos of Tritons, and conchs in seaweed cities blow wild tunes learned from the Elder Ones, then great eager mists flock to heaven laden with lore, and oceanward eyes on the rocks see only a mystic whiteness, as if the cliff's rim were the rim of all earth, and the solemn bells of buoys tolled free in the aether of fairy.
Wow.
I think I just got aroused.
What? Aroused?
Yeah. All that planet on planet action in that first paragraph there.
I was thinking of the that aether of fairy is the stuff I think that the dentist used when he pulled my wisdom teeth.
It's possible. Yeah. What are caves of Leviathan? Leviathan. That's like just a big sea monster or something.
Yeah, it's just a big old sea monster. That's all that is. Don't be scared, Chad.
Okay.
It's just a story.
All right.
It's a story that's called The Strange High House in the Mist by Howard Phillips Lovecraft, famous 1920s horror science fiction writer.
And we're reading about it here, or talking about it here on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
And it's hppodcraft.com. And that reader, who so eloquently produced those words, is none other than Scott McDonald.
Scott McDonald making a return to Kingsport after reading for us on the festival.
Yeah, he was our Kingsport guy. And I'm happy to say that his doctors are allowing him to read this story. So he's on board for this one.
Hopefully you'll get to hear it from the cell.
Wait, who are you?
I'm sorry, I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey.
This story is quite a bit less horrific than the festival was, however.
Right.
I will say that I do love the title of the story. I mean, it's a great title.
Yeah, it is. And there's some elements of the story that are really neat. I thought really cool and interesting and provocative.
Well, so the first paragraph, he's just sort of giving a sense of place, and there's this mist that comes up against the cliffs in Kingsport, and it's very mystical, right? I mean, it seems very magical.
Yeah, it shares it shares the information with the clouds, its brothers, and dreams are scattered in the rain to poets and visions and things, and it's very hippy dippy kind of stuff.
Yes, yeah. Oh man, Lovecraft would hate to be called hippy dippy.
I know,
it's hilarious.
I know.
Yeah, well, so the mist rolls up against these cliffs that are all around Kingsport, and most of the cliffs, folks in town they like. They've got one they call Father Neptune. They've got one they call the Causeway. But this one cliff is so high and tall, and nobody really likes it. The Portuguese sailors, when they pass it, they cross themselves.
Yeah.
And up on that huge cliff, there's a house, all alone up there.
Yeah, it's on this crazy high cliff, and maybe Scott should tell us a little bit about this house.
The ancient house has always been there, and people say one dwells therein who talks with the morning mists that come up from the deep, and perhaps sees singular things oceanward at those times when the cliff's rim becomes the rim of all earth, and solemn buoys toll free in the white ether of fairy. This they tell from hearsay, for that forbidding crag is always unvisited, and natives dislike to train telescopes on it. Summer boarders have indeed scanned it with jaunty binoculars, but have never seen more than the gray primeval roof, peaked and shingled, whose eaves come nearly to the gray foundations, and the dim yellow light of the little windows peeping out from under those eaves in the dusk. These summer people do not believe that the same one has lived in the ancient house for hundreds of years, but cannot prove their heresy to any real Kingsporter. Even the terrible old man who talks to leaden pendulums in bottles, buys groceries with centuried Spanish gold, and keeps stone idols in the yards of his antediluvian cottage in Water Street, can only say these things were the same when his grandfather was a boy, and that must have been inconceivable ages ago, when Belcher or Shirley or Pownall or Bernard was governor of His Majesty's province of the Massachusetts Bay.
Wow. Okay.
But that's the terrible old man. He's coming back.
Yeah, it's good to see the terrible old man hanging out there, still buying groceries with his doubloons and talking to things in bottles. Yeah, it's great to see that character come back. Now, this story's cool in that they do bring a few different things. Lovecraft, more and more, as we see, is starting to use his old stories and his own mythology within his new stories, and I think that's really neat.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I think this idea of a house that is up in this position and nobody remembers it not being there and nobody can get to it is really cool. That's like a really creepy...
It's really cool
concept.
Yeah, it's great that and people see the lights on at night and they just don't know what's going on up there. I'm telling you, that's the cool thing about this story. The problem with this story is there's, phrases like jaunty binoculars.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Doesn't make any sense. How could binoculars be jaunty? Do they have little pink happy messages on the side or something?
You hold them sideways in some way or something. I don't know.
It doesn't really invoke anything in me except confusion.
But when the terrible old man says, well, my grandfather was afraid of that house too, it's been there a long time.
That's flipping old, because the terrible old man is, as his name says, old.
Yeah, he's very old.
So one day, this philosopher breezes into town. This is our main character, Thomas Olney.
Yeah, that really confused me, by the way, when he came in, because I quickly looked him up to see, is this guy is actually somebody, and he's a settler of Rhode Island. He's a settler of Providence, rather.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Thomas Olney, yeah. He was an early minister. I'm looking at Wikipedia right now. He's the early minister of the First Baptist Church in America and a co-founder of Rhode Island and Providence Plantation. So I thought, well, wait a minute. This seemed to be taking place in Lovecraft's modern day, but, Thomas Olney was around in the 1600s.
Yeah.
So it sort of confused me. I mean, he died in 1682, so I didn't understand for a moment. And then I realized, well, he just took the name.
Yeah.
And made it this character.
Exactly. But that's cool. I didn't know that's an actual borrowed name from Rhode Island history.
Yeah.
So when Thomas breezes in and he hangs out in Kingsport, and he's got a wife, a stout wife.
Stout wife, yeah. And romping
and
children.
Kids. Yeah. And he just kind of, chills out in Kingsport, walks around. He talks to the terrible old man, gets some good stories from him.
Yeah.
And terrible old man doesn't usually talk to folks, but, he's talking to Thomas, so Thomas must be a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. He comes into town, he's like, I like the cliffs, I'm digging the town, I'm going to go talk to this terrible old man. He's not afraid of him.
No, he's not. And then as he's asking, talking about local history and stuff, something comes up.
Of course, it was inevitable that Olney should mark the gray, unvisited cottage in the sky, on that sinister northward crag which is one with the mists and the firmament. Always over Kingsport it hung, and always its mystery sounded in whispers through Kingsport's crooked alleys. The terrible old man wheezed a tale that his father had told him, of lightning that shot one night up from that peaked cottage to the clouds of higher heaven, and Granny Orne, whose tiny gambrel-roofed abode in Ship Street is all covered with moss and ivy, croaked over something her grandmother had heard at second hand, about shapes that flapped out of the eastern mists, straight into the narrow single door of that unreachable place. For the door is set close to the edge of the crag toward the ocean, and glimpsed only from the ships at sea.
Very cool. When I was excited to reread this story, because I think I read it when I was young, and I remembered that very well, that the house is on a cliff. The door opens to nothing. To nothing,
to the ocean. It's a drop. It's like hundreds of foot drop. The house is right up to the edge.
Yeah,
and that's funny because I've in England there have been places that have built right on the edge of bluffs, cliffs, and things, and then the erosion will take them away. And there's buildings that have actually fallen off into the ocean, because they're hundreds of years old. So that kind of makes it even more weird and creepy and unnatural, the fact that it's been on this cliff, this edge, for a long time. So it's been in this weird precarious. It's really it's just neat.
In terms of setting, I mean, you really can't beat it. And now when I was reading the story again, I thought, oh man, I really wish that this was. Well, I shouldn't criticize it too hard. I think that it's there are a lot of folks that really like it, and And it definitely sits well within. I think Lovecraft was probably very pleased with the story. It really seems to hit on a lot of the mythological stuff that he likes.
Yeah.
What I liked about it was the more horrific aspects of it, but I think that overall that's what I struggle with his work.
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in what is that. The door that points. What's knocking on the door that points to nothing.
Right.
And what's that creepy thing out there? Whereas he's more interested maybe in old Celtic gods showing up and
yeah. Well, I think your
seashells and fairies along.
And I think you share probably an opinion that most people who are fans of Lovecraft share.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, it's somewhat disappointing after some of the stories that we've covered lately. We had some Call of Cthulhu and some Pickman's Model, and it seems like we're really ramping up. And then the last couple stories, we're going, what are we doing? Yeah. Why are you dragging me back to this fairy stuff?
Yep. And unfortunately, Chad, we're going to be getting some more of that soon because I know the Dream Quest. Anyway. Thomas is super excited by this story, and he just makes a proclamation. He's going, I'm going to go up to that house. I'm going to figure out a way to get there. Because he gets this idea that maybe, because Arkham is on the other side of this mountain where the house is. So he thinks there's a way to go up from Arkham, and maybe the guy that lives up there, or whoever lives up there, goes down to Arkham, and the people of Kingsport just don't know anything about it because he just never comes down to Kingsport.
Yeah, they just don't have the right perspective.
Exactly. He goes over to Arkham. I mean, he kisses his wife and his kids goodbye, and he goes, I'm going to make this happen. So he goes around to Arkham, and then he cuts through the woods and goes up, and it's, there is no path that goes up there. He has to actually, push his way through the mountains and or through the hills and through the woods and fields, and he finds no paths. And then he gets up to a really high ridge, and then there's this big crag that goes down about 10 feet. So he has to climb down the crag and go across and climb up the other side of the crag until finally...
When he climbed out of the chasm, a morning mist was gathering, but he clearly saw the lofty and unhallowed cottage ahead, walls as gray as the rock, and high peaks standing bold against the milky white of the seaward vapors. And he perceived that there was no door on this landward end, but only a couple of small lattice windows with dingy bull's-eye panes leaded in 17th century fashion. All around him was cloud and chaos, and he could see nothing below but the whiteness of illimitable space. He was alone in the sky with this queer and very disturbing house. And when he sidled around to the front, he saw that the wall stood flush with the cliff's edge, so that the single narrow door was not to be reached save from the empty ether. He felt a distinct terror that altitude could not wholly explain, and it was very odd that shingles so worm-eaten could survive, or bricks so crumbled still form a standing chimney.
Wow. That is...
Yeah, as you say, it's amazing that this thing is still standing up there.
Yeah, and it the fact that it is sort of defying reason and logic, and it makes it extra creepy. And I'm excited. And when I was reading the story, I was like, wow, okay, we're in, man. This is great. This is going to be so creepy, and they're going to, it's setting such a great mood, and you can't see even the water.
It's sort of like, when you're on an airplane and you look out the window and the cloud texture almost seems like it's a land all on its own. It would be very odd to just see a house sitting there in the middle of it. So Thomas is, he wants to figure out how to get into this place or see what's going on inside. So he starts sort of creeping around the house and looking in the windows. Then he hears a bolt, and somebody is coming into the house. He hears the door open and shut, so whoever it is came home somehow. He's not on the side, obviously he's not on the side where the door is because you can't get around there.
Yeah.
Then he hears somebody, wandering around the cottage, and the window's opening.
Yeah. So he moves around to because he doesn't want to be seen. He kind of steps out of the way because he's a little scared.
Yeah, exactly. But sooner or later this guy's going to see him because he's opening all the windows in the house. He comes around to the north side, and the guy pokes his head out the window, and he gets a glimpse of this guy who lives in the strange high house.
Stuck out of a west window was a great black-bearded face, whose eyes shone phosphorescently with the imprint of unheard-of sights. But the voice was gentle and of quaint olden kind, so that Olney did not shudder when a brown hand reached out to help him over the sill and into that low room of black oak wainscots and carved Tudor finishings. The man was clad in very ancient garments, and had about him an unplaceable nimbus of sea lore and dreams of tall galleons.
Ugh. And this is where it makes a crazy turn, and I'm getting a little lost. Lovecraft had me, and then a dude with a soft voice, phosphorescent eyes, glowing. There's like a glow to his eyes, and
well, he's seen unheard of sights, and that's what that does to your eyes physically.
Yeah.
The guy looks young.
Yeah, he's a younger guy, tan skin, dark hair, and he invites him into the house. So he crawls in through the window, obviously. He starts telling him all these, crazy tales. He's nice. He's a nice guy. And he tells him about the kings of Atlantis and how they fought with slippery blasphemies.
Yeah.
And he talks about the Titans, and he also, in this little bit here,
but the host grew timid when he spoke of the dim first age of chaos before the gods or even the Elder Ones were born, and when only the other gods came to dance on the peak of Hatheg Kla in the stony desert near Ulthar, beyond the river sky.
Bringing in some past stories again.
Yeah, another past story. That's the
other gods.
The other gods, yeah, exactly. Also, Ulthar gets brought up again. We just had Ulthar last story. The other gods.
It's interesting how he brings in some things that are outside of his own created mythos, like Atlantis and
yes, and Poseidon, Titans. Those are all
the Titans. Yeah. And this story does that. It mixes some older mythologies with his own stuff, and that's pretty interesting. I did like that sentence about the kings of Atlantis fighting with the slippery blasphemy. Well, then it makes me wonder, because I think there's all sorts of different philosophies about why Atlantis fell. Why it sank into the ocean.
Right.
But this seems to imply that it was because of a battle with sea monsters, right?
Yeah, I guess. I like it.
Some sea monsters attacked Atlantis, these blasphemies, and they were the ones that brought it low.
Yeah, it could be. Maybe, this is some kind of reference to Dagon or other, these ancient underwater creatures and civilizations and things. It's pretty neat. And as they're talking and having a great time and he's listening to these tales, there's a knock at the door. It scares Thomas. He kind of jolts, but then the bearded guy says, "Hey, chill out, just be quiet." And he tiptoes over to the door and he looks through a peephole, and then he just puts his fingers to his lips and says, shh, don't say anything. And then he tiptoes over to the windows and closes and locks them and closes them all. And then something, because these are distorted glass, so you can't really see through it, but light comes in. Something moves around the house trying to get in, and then it goes away. Super creepy.
Yeah, it's some kind of shuddering blasphemy that is able to knock on the door from space, so it's floating out there in the mists. And then it's really creepy that it's double checking whether he's home or not.
Yeah. Oh, man. But he doesn't talk about it. He doesn't really explain what the heck that was. And he just goes on to his other stories. And the day gets long and he lights some candles. And, I'm thinking maybe something romantic is going to happen at this point. Like they're having this really cool conversation and they're really into each other. I thought, there's going to be a little magic.
Yeah. Anytime Lovecraft introduces a little bearded man, you know that there might be some romance.
So they're interrupted before anything happens, before anything gets down. There's a knock at the door, but this time the knock is almost like a code.
Yeah.
A certain rhythm to it. And the bearded man gets up, just walks over to the door and opens it up. Doesn't check through the peephole, doesn't do anything, just flows it open. And then he gets an eyeful of this.
And then to the sound of obscure harmonies there floated into that room from the deep all the dreams and memories of Earth's sunken mighty ones. And golden flames played about weedy locks, so that Olney was dazzled as he did them homage. Trident-bearing Neptune was there, and sportive Tritons and fantastic Nereids, and upon dolphins' backs was balanced a vast crenulate shell wherein rode the gray and awful form of primal Nodens, lord of the great abyss. And the conchs of the Tritons gave weird blasts, and the Nereids made strange sounds by striking on the grotesque resonant shells of unknown lurkers in black sea caves. Then hoary Nodens reached forth the wizened hand and helped Olney and his host into the vast shell, whereat the conchs and the gongs set up a wild and awesome clamor. And out into the limitless ether reeled that fabulous train, the noise of whose shouting was lost in the echoes of thunder.
What? I mean, what is going on? I'm not going to pretend to even be intelligent. I read this. I don't know what is happening. Nodin shows up. Isn't he he's like a Celtic god of some kind? He's not alone. It's like a whole party of insane gods showed up.
Yeah.
Right? Because Neptune is there.
Hold on. I'll break it down for you. First, Neptune, who is, the god of the oceans. The Tritons are like mermen. Neptune had a son who was called Triton, and he was just kind of Neptune light. But then in the folklore, it's sort of changed into Tritons, plural, and they're like messengers of Neptune, but they are like mermen. They're half man, lower half of their body is fish, the upper half is a man.
Okay.
The Nereids are foxy chicks that come out of the ocean. They're just real sexy and
right.
stuff. And then Flounder and Ariel were in Little Mermaid. It's in the subtext.
It might as well, man.
Yeah,
might as well.
And Nodin's, like you said, is a Celtic god associated with healing, the sea, hunting, and dogs. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
So these
and
dogs, yeah. So they show up, they come into the room, and then they're like, "Hey, baby, get on board." And then the bearded man and Thomas jump in this giant conch shell, and then they fly off. It's like the ending of Grease.
It totally is. It's the weirdest thing, man. This whole party just shows up. They blow into the room. I can't imagine what that's like because, there's some dolphins involved as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The dolphins have somebody on their back. It's just crazy. The whole thing's just crazy. And they're flying dolphins, I guess, because there's no water up here. This doesn't make any sense. The people in Kingsport see this going on, and there's a big storm going on top of the hill. So everybody's watching. Watching the storm.
They don't actually see it going on. They just see they're watching the cliff because they know that he's up there, that Thomas is up there.
Right, but there's a big thunderstorm that's happening while this is happening.
Right.
Yeah. And
but they're not seeing flying dolphins.
Oh no, they don't see any of the cool stuff. Yeah. Or I use that in quotes. They don't see any of the cool stuff up there. The next day, Thomas comes down. He's fine. He's dry. He's not wet after this whole storm happened. He just comes down. Hey, what's up? What's going on? He chats to everybody. Yeah. Nothing seems out of the ordinary. He can't really remember what happened, exactly. He goes to the old man, tells the old man. He goes, I think there was some stuff that happened with some, there was a guy with a beard and maybe some gods showed up. I don't remember. It's all kind of vague. It's a dream to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so the terrible old man just kind of goes, he just kind of shakes his head and mumbles some queer things. And then he says,
"The man who came down from that crag was not wholly the man who went up. And that somewhere under that gray-peaked roof, or amidst inconceivable reaches of that sinister white mist, there lingered still the lost spirit of him who was Thomas Olney."
He came back changed.
Yeah, something's different about him.
A couple of things about that are interesting, actually. Well, one, it's something that somewhat annoys me, is that Lovecraft frequently will have his protagonist go and do something really amazing or see some really crazy things, and then they can't quite recall. He never finishes it. How did they get out of this situation? How did they get back? They always just wind up on a road somewhere. Somebody finds them. If this guy comes back, people have been staring at that house up on the cliff for so long. This guy goes up there. Everybody knows he went up there. He comes back down. He's like, I don't really remember how I got up there or how I came back. Who isn't going to sit him down and just beat him till he tells them what he knows? They maybe not beat him, but these are the worst interrogators of all time.
Yeah.
People aren't curious?
No, well, see, here's the thing. Maybe they're not curious because they're afraid of what's up there. They don't want to know what's up there. And maybe they're afraid he was going to stir some stuff up. And since he comes down, everything seems fine. They're just going to let it go.
I don't believe it.
I don't know.
The other thing that is interesting, though, is he kind of goes on this fantastic journey. He goes up there, meets Poseidon and Nodens, and they go flying around all night. But it actually has a negative impact on him.
Yeah, the spark of his life just kind of goes out. He's not really into philosophy, not into all the great things. I mean, he's a good guy. Lovecraft says specifically he's a good citizen. And his wife, gets fatter, and his kids grow up, and and he moves away. He goes to Bristol Highlands, which is in Rhode Island, and he just kind of lives out his life, and that's it.
Yeah.
But
he becomes probably what his wife and kids wanted him to be, which is just a solid, steady guy,
and not a dreamer.
Exactly, perfectly fine with his own philosophy, and is a good dad and a good husband, but isn't always running around and trying to climb cliffs or do anything like that.
Now that he's out of the picture, people in Kingsport, there's new stories flying around. And people say that they're hearing At night, sometimes they can hear pleasing voices and singing and laughter. And the lights from the house seem a little brighter than they did before. And even the aurora comes, lights up the sky, which it usually doesn't that far south. So something extra has happened to it. People are worried that it's going to attract the young people of Kingsport, that people are actually going to go up there, go visit this house, and the same thing's going to happen. And they'll come back and they've lost their passion. And things are going to get louder, and there's going to be more music, and it'll attract more attention, and it'll attract more attention of creepy things, of the bad stuff. That it might attract the attention of the old gods, that they might come back from the deep and from unknown Kadath,
right?
Which is going to play into our next story.
Oh yeah.
And that leads us to
all these things. However, the elder ones only may decide, and meanwhile, the morning mist still comes up by that lonely, vertiginous peak with the steep ancient house. That gray, low-eaved house where none is seen, but where evening brings furtive lights while the north wind tells of strange revels. White and feathery it comes from the deep to its brothers the clouds, full of dreams of dank pastures and caves of Leviathan. And when tales fly thick in the grottos of Tritons, and conchs in seaweed cities blow wild tunes learned from the elder ones, then great eager vapors flock to heaven laden with lore, and Kingsport, nestling uneasy on its lesser cliffs below that awesome hanging sentinel of rock, sees oceanward only a mystic whiteness, as if the cliff's rim were the rim of all earth, and the solemn bells of the buoys tolled free in the ether of faerie.
And that is the end of the story, looking very much like the
beginning of the story. Yeah.
Complaints I've heard about this story is essentially that it's written kind of poorly,
Yeah.
For example, the repetition of phrase that he uses in the end is from the beginning. I think he even repeats some of those phrases at other times in the story.
Yeah.
Is that necessary?
No.
I don't think it is.
I don't think it adds anything to it. It doesn't connect anything from the beginning to the end. It's a forced connection. The only connection is that it's used from the beginning. It doesn't address any of the stuff that your soul can go off and hang out with these people and these gods and do all these things. That's not addressed in the beginning, and there's no new insight provided, looking at the beginning again at the end. It's kind of, it's weak.
Or almost like a song, he'll create a nice turn of phrase at the beginning, and then he repeats it again in the end. And it's pleasing because he really did some good writing for his intro. Here, the buoys tolling free in the ether of faerie.
No. It's very disappointing. I wasn't particularly into that story.
I have to say this, though. I found a web comic.
Oh, yeah?
That this fellow, a fellow named Jason Thompson, has been drawing and putting up online. And we'll put the link in the show notes. Reading his comic version of this was way better than reading the story. I thought it was really good. Yeah, it was much more interesting when it had that strong visual component. I don't know. The guy's very talented. He was making the story pretty interesting, I thought.
Well, this story was originally written on November 9th, 1926, and it was submitted to Weird Tales in 27, but rejected, rightfully so. In 29, Lovecraft agreed with W. Paul Cook to publish it in his second issue of The Recluse, but it just didn't happen. Like, the guy couldn't get it together, and it never got published.
Never came out.
And so he resubmitted it to Weird Tales in 31.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, in 31, and it got accepted, and he was paid $55.
Hey, that's not too shabby.
No, there you go. So that's it. That's kind of the background of that story. Well, next week, we're gonna really be getting into the Dreamlands with, I believe, almost the last. No, it's not quite the last. One of the big Dreamlands epic of Randolph Carter and the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
I've never read that before, so it'll be an interesting.
I have. Here's the thing. I've tried to read it before, and I've never gotten through it.
Really?
I take it as a challenge to us, Chad, you and myself,
mm-hmm.
that we need to not only get through the story, but understand it. This is when the audience really needs us, because if I was a listener, this is one of those stories that I've never gotten through and never thought that I could get through. So we're going to have to take our listeners by the hands, get our machetes out and chop through this jungle that is the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
Well, I have faith. Ken, when he was on last week, kept mentioning it. He said he really liked it.
He does, yeah.
It's something he loves a lot. So if he likes it, there's got to be some good stuff.
There's got to be some good stuff in there. So hopefully you and I will be wrong about this, and we'll really dig the Dream Quest.
I want to thank Scott McDonald for reading for us today. Great job. Sounded good.
Sounded good.
Melted my heart a little.
Yeah, he sounds great, and hopefully he'll be getting out of the institution soon.
And again, I want to thank everybody for all of their donations. We're in the process of mixing Haunter the Dark right now, so it will be up for you to have very soon.
Very soon.
Thank you so much for contributing. And that's all I've got.
That's all I have. I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And this has been the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
At hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com.